Welcome to MidLIFE Matters, where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Gwen Samuel. Gwen is the president and founder of Connecticut Parents Union, and she is a taxpayer advocate and much, much more. We're all in for a treat. Welcome, Gwen.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited, because MidLIFE matters.
MidLIFE matters. Thank you. Now, about 10 years ago, you were featured as a mom we love in a parenting magazine.
Yes.
For the state of Connecticut, well, there was one from each state, as I understand it.
Actually, it's actually called Mom Congress.
Okay.
And so in 2010, I got an email, which I thought was spam, by the way. So I deleted it and put it in spam.
Okay.
And I was selected to represent Connecticut through a parenting magazine contest, and where they chose one amazing mom from each state to talk about education across the country. And we got to meet with the Secretary of Education. At that time, it was Arnie Duncan. And then we had our whole event at Georgetown University. That was the beginning of my national stage, if you will. So yes, I was selected to represent Connecticut. And I actually got to represent Connecticut 2 years before the magazine was bought in 2013.
Wonderful. And what started you on this community advocacy path?
And it's interesting because many people know me as Mama Bear or Miss Gwen, and I'm fighting for the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, which I do for children. But I actually started with safe walk routes for children. One of my close friends, I got a call like 5:30 in the morning. Can you take my daughter to school? Like, she's in middle school. Where am I taking her to? And he says, because she's a walker. And I'm like, well, it's dark outside. Where is she walking to? They said, to school. So I took her and I watched the walk routes, and I seen overgrown shrubs, dark bridges, you know, children walk across highway ramps in my city. I'm like, that's not what we're doing with children. So I said, maybe I'm being punked. Maybe it's not our children. So I visited the state board of our local board of education. I'm like, do you know we have children walking across highway ramps? And they're like, well, that's the policy. If you're in kindergarten, you can walk up to a mile. I don't know what parent's going to do that. If you're in middle school, 1.5. And then if you're high school, it's 2 miles. So I said, okay, I remember back in the day, my parents walked, so I'm not opposed to walking healthy, but we're going to be safe for children. And that actually began my advocacy journey for safe routes to school. So my city, I developed the Meriton Kids Walk Safe.
Okay.
And I engaged our legislators, and I had legislators walk the routes that children walked, and then they realized as adults we could do better. And so that actually began my advocacy journey, and that was back in 2004. And it's interesting because I don't think of myself as an advocate, because to me, when you're a parent, you're automatically an advocate. Right? Because you're representing your child's interest. And during those times of 2004, my daughter was only 2. I unemployed, trying to figure out my next steps in life. And then it was at that time that, around that time, that I enrolled back in college for my bachelor's. So in 2003, I got my bachelor's and graduated in 2006.
Which is great.
Right. Which is the moral of that story is you're never too late to learn.
Right.
And my kids we got to learn and grow together.
This Connecticut Parents Union, what does that represent, or how did that come about?
And so it's interesting. So if you fast forward almost 8 years later, and it was interesting how I formed the Connecticut Parents Union. So back in 2009 and 10, it was around the time that Barack Obama was the president, and the recession hit. And so when the recession hit, the unemployment rates, and so I said, how do we work with the most vulnerable communities? So I formed something called the State of Black Connecticut. It wasn't meant to be in a organization, just something to work with some of our most vulnerable populations in the state. And so I formed this group, and then there was a law that was passed in California called the Parent Empowerment Law, also known as the Parent Trigger. So in California, if a parent was in a low-performing school and the majority of the parents voted to reform it, they had a chance to improve it. And to me, that's ownership. Your child attends to school. Parents need be an active part of their children's education. I thought it was a good law. So I said, oh, let's bring that Connecticut. So I thought everyone was going to love parents being on it. And Houston, I was wrong. So I worked with the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus and other lawmakers, and we introduced a parent empowerment law. And the attacks on parents was so brutal. It didn't matter what color you were. Mm-hmm. Parents weren't capable of being engaged in their children's life, making decisions, regarding education. And I'm like, excuse me, Mr. Government. Last time I checked the birth certificate, your name wasn't on there. Mm-hmm. So, parents need to be an active part of their children's education because it's their children. And so I introduced the law, and the attacks were so brutal that I said I just never wanted to see that again. So I worked with parents, and we formed the Connecticut Parents Union in 2011, mm-hmm. January 14th. And the bottom line is to protect the educational rights of children. And that's how many people know me, as mm-hmm. that fierce advocate for children. And because it's not a soundbite that children are our future. Like, they really are. Mm-hmm. And if you don't invest in them now, you're going to have two choices. They're either going to be taxpayers or they're going to be tax burdens, mm-hmm. meaning our prison systems, our temporary, our welfare systems, right? The systems that the government kind of has to take care of you until you hopefully take care of yourself. And I'm saying no. Give children the tools so that they can live self-governing lives. And so that's why we formed the Connecticut Parents Union, to ensure that every child, regardless of skin color, zip code, school model, has access to what they need to be productive, self-governing citizens. That's how we formed the Connecticut Parents Union. We've been around 11 years now, all volunteer. Mm-hmm. So shout out to your volunteer executive director. And it's a lot of work, but again, our children deserve the best that the adults have to offer to ensure their future success. The challenge is the politics has become so ugly. Everything's about ideologies and my political party is better than your political party. I'm like, I don't want to hear any of that. We need to do what's best for children. Mm-hmm. And so we adults just, regardless, have to do better.
Well, that's a very powerful message and group of people.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a lot of work because parents, because parents are not trusting right now, mm-hmm. right? This pandemic has just exposed that we need to do better at working together, mm-hmm. as a state, as a country, as local communities, because mm-hmm. most politics is local.
Sure. And speaking of politics, you're also a taxpayer advocate.
Yes, and I'm a big time because, I don't know, Connecticut's a beautiful state, beautiful people, but we need to do better at being fiscally responsible. People are doing the best they can with their limited resources. We've had so many small businesses permanently closed down. The private sector was shut down during this pandemic. And so now people are trying to find their bearings. People have lost their homes. People are being displaced. And so that means when the money, our government, when our elected officials have our tax dollars, then they need to be fiscally responsible and ensure that there's a return on that tax investment. And that's the challenge with our state. The checks and balances are very limited. Transparency is a bad word. And I'm like, well, it can be you can be non-transparent with your money. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the taxpayers' money, we want to know how you're spending it. Especially if you're going to keep overtaxing us and raising taxes and making it harder for the everyday small business and family to make it, then make sure we know how you're spending our money.
That's a pretty tall order.
Well, no. Actually,
I mean, it should be very simple, right? But it sounds like swimming upstream a lot to me.
Right. Because we as people like to trust. Mm-hmm. Right? We know because what is the role of government? To keep communities safe, right? They say law and order. Mm-hmm. And so, but with that trust, it's almost like, don't worry about the taxpayer. Don't pay attention to what's happening behind the curtain. Vote for me in November. I'll take care of everything. If I need you, I'll give you a call. Mm-hmm. And that is why we are the uphill battles, because we need to be more informed taxpayers. So why are you voting? Can't be because of someone's political party. Mm-hmm. Suppose the person doesn't meet your interests. Suppose that individual doesn't meet what your family needs, what your community needs, what your school needs. Are you still going to vote for that person? That tall order is because we are very trusting mm-hmm. as a community. But this pandemic showed that we as taxpayers and voters, we're going to have to want to know what is going on when we When we buy something at the store, you're paying taxes, right? If you're in Connecticut, you pay car taxes, right? We have income tax. We have all of this, but where is the money going? Especially when we have some very unsafe schools in this community. Again, no reflection on the great teachers we have. But a poor school, a quality school is a poor quality school. And so why don't we have other options, right? Other schooling options to show that maybe this school type doesn't meet that child's need. I was at a meeting very recently. I was appointed on this juvenile justice oversight committee, like this, of all the state agencies, and we're talking about our youthful. And one of the conversations was suspension and expulsions of pre-K through second grade. What could a four-year-old do? There were some of the brightest minds and some of the most nurturing schools and child care workers that we can't figure out how to support children. When we're resulting to suspending and expelling them over and over again, maybe this is not the environment. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we're paying for something that's not working. We pay, you can tell the heart of a community based on what you invest your money in. And we pay a lot for the prison system. So imagine if we took that investment and focused on the future to prevent them to getting there, because the tax dollar will go there quicker than that future employer, that future small business. So yes, it's a tall order because we've just been too trusting. And now we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and work together to ensure that all boats are lifted as we try to stabilize Connecticut.
From what I'm understanding, basically still a focus on education.
Absolutely.
As it relates to how tax dollars are allocated.
Yes. And I'll give you a prime example.
Sure.
In Connecticut, we, back in the day, I'm from Meriden, but in Hartford, there was a lawsuit called Shep versus O'Neill. And that was because Hartford residents saying that, which is majority of color, weren't getting the same quality of education as its surrounding towns like West Hartford. So there was a law that was passed to integrate. So it had like racial quotas. You had to have so many black children. You had to have so many Hispanic children. You had to have so many white children. No, we're not using race to determine who gets access to skin, to the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. Yet we did, and the taxpayer paid for that. So the question becomes, how did that benefit all children fairly? And that is that the best use of tax dollars? The better use is to ensure that regardless of the school model, no matter where they are in the state, all schools need to be safe and high quality, regardless of the model. Now that's a better return on the taxpayer investment. But Connecticut is a land. I love my state. We love flavor of the month. Every no child left behind. Well, guess what? We shouldn't leave no child behind. But it's more of a soundbite than actually making sure that we leave no child behind. And when we fail children, they raise taxes. When they fail children, then all of a sudden it becomes your fault because you're a white woman. It's the white family. This is the real conversations. And these are tough conversations. But at the end of the day, regardless of who we are in this together. And so it does relate to education, even jobs. We talk about our traditional colleges. What about our vocational, technicals? Everyone's not going to be in a statistic class. Someone wants to be the mechanic. Someone wants to build houses. But yet certain communities can't get access to trades so that they can get the skills to be contributors to our tax base. So the question becomes, do we want to just have a one-size-fit-all model? We have over 500,000 children in this state. How can we possibly think all of those children are the same? We're not. And so as a result, we're paying, some schools get double money. Don't even ask how that goes. So what I'm saying is, as a taxpayer, as a voter, we just have to become more informed and engaged to ensure that we get the better return. And especially with this pandemic, where people are trying to find their bearings again in a very unstable climate, where we're in a constant flux.
How do you experience people in terms of responding to your message about being more of an involved voter, for example?
Right. So it looks different. That's the challenge, right? Because we all need to be saying it. It's not the Gwen Samuel show. It's not this amazing MidLIFE Matters show. It is all of us show. And so having constant communications, talking to the least of us, and we're not talking to one another. I don't know why communication is a dirty word, but for some reason it is. We talk at one another, but we don't talk to one another. They saying vote for so-and-so. We're starting to idolize legislators and lawmakers. They're human beings. I believe in God. So we need to be better. And so that means we have to get better at communicating. And that's what I think that's one of our, I don't want to say a deficit, but we could just do better as neighbors. I heard a horrific story that hurt me. I think it was in another state, I want to say. There was an elderly woman that passed at the dinner table and had been in her house for over a year. No one knew she had passed. How do we get there as a state in the country that you don't know your neighbor anymore? Doesn't mean you don't have to lock your door, because we're in a different world. But that doesn't mean you should know who's surrounding you, And again, it starts with just the basic kind word of good morning, good afternoon. Who is the new neighbor moving in? Who is next to my child? Right? Where the village, it's no longer the village, we're the foundation. When the lights go off, the kids were in the house. Remember the commercials? It's 10 o'clock, do you know where your child are?
Yeah.
Now I have to say it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, do you know where your children are? Because the pandemic and the closure of schools, it just has created a very unstable time. And sadly, it has resulted in increased crime. It has resulted in just hyper-partisan politics. And we are human beings. We are not pawns in anyone's game. And we're definitely not political wedges to be tossed to and from. Are you in
contact with any of the people that you met through the other states from your original?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We are family. I am honored to be able to say that I stay in contact with every parent that I've gotten to meet, if they're around for the most part in the state. And that's my strength, actually, that I've had the pleasure of working with parents across the country. I've actually had the pleasure in 2012 of testifying before Congress. And that's an interesting story because I don't think I was their first choice. And this is, to me, the dangers of partisan politics. And the reason why I can connect that so easy to education. So there was a hearing on parental engagement. They wanted to learn solutions about engaging families. And it looks like they had invited a parent group out of California. This parent group, and they're great people, just want to, for the record, didn't want to testify because they were majority Republicans. I'm like, you think children care about Democrats? That children need support. So you mean to tell me I am not going to speak in the highest court of the place of the land, which is Congress, where my testimony will be memorialized in history for my grandchildren and their children to see that their grandmother weighed in, and I am not to talk about the power of parents because of the letter that's behind their name, their political affiliation? Oh, no. I was like, sign me up. Because at the end of the day, we must center children if we are going to invest in our future. And again, I take that very serious. And I say, well, if you don't want a problem with me, don't mess with children. It's that simple.
It's that simple.
But anyway, that's how I got to testify. And to me, that's concerning. Because to support children, to protect them, has nothing to do with party affiliations. It's about the adults in the children's lives to make informed and responsible decisions on behalf of the children until we expose them to the tools so that they can make informed and responsible decisions for themselves. Now, am I an imperfect mom? Absolutely. I've had even though I was born in the 60s, dating myself, I always think I could have easily fell into the hippie movement, if you will, the flower child moment, because I just free, but everything has a consequence. And so then you grow up, and when you know better, you strive to do better.
Yeah. And you also have a minority woman-owned construction business.
Yes. And so, because I once was married, no longer, we're great friends though. Mm-hmm. And so my ex-husband, he was in construction. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, we could create jobs and opportunities. And so my children, when they graduated, I was like, everybody's taking OSHA training. What is OSHA training, Mom? Mm-hmm. Well, when you graduate, if you don't have a job, we're going to have OSHA training so you can work on the construction. So I went back to college. I got my construction management license to support my ex-husband. And then we formed a construction company. Mm-hmm. And then when we were no longer together, I just changed it to subcontracting and working on the workforce development aspect of my construction. Yep. So I am a woman-owned, woman-owned construction company.
Well, that fits beautifully with what you're saying about not having just one system for every child. And what about the children who are gifted in those areas?
Exactly. Yes. And it's interesting because both of my, so I've had some tragedy in my life over the last 5 years, and practicing saying it without just being tears, but in 2016 I lost my second born. He was 24, just turned 25, I should say, in a fatal car accident. No one's fault. I've never had a loss. I'm blessed to have my mother and father. We're a very small family, and I thought my world was like over. I have 3 children, and he was a high school dropout, and so we struggled with that. But because dropping out wasn't an option, we found Job Corps. And he was very successful in culinary. And I remember when he got his first job in a fast food, and I remember them saying, your son has more certifications than some of the adults I have. That's the power of alternative education.
Yes.
And then fast forward, last year in May, a week after Mother's Day, I lost my firstborn in a fatal car accident in Florida. Now I want to crawl up, under the bed, because I'm like, no, I'm done, Then but I have 2 other amazing children. Like, Mom, we're here, and I said, yes, it's not choosing between children. It's about understanding that my firstborn, I was 24 and 26, still a baby in my eyes, trying to have children, right? And so the first 2 children had to grow with me maturing. Right? They had to grow with me through the mistakes of being a young mom. I call that my looking for love in all the wrong places, but shh, audience. Right? And so, but they grew up with me with that. And so they got to see me at my worst of being a new mom, and to the mom who says, nope, you got to make better decisions, Mom. Right? To the mom of, I'm going back to college at 33, Mom. And then they end up having children. So now I have grandchildren that no longer have their father. And they're boys. And, I know the world likes to say, oh, I'm a single mom, but dads are here for a reason. And having that male figure. So I'm in that space right now of honoring their memory, and yet at the same time staying true to what God has called me to do, and that is to ensure that every child have what they need to be productive citizens, because we are going to be senior citizens one day. And I need to make sure that the person that's doing my Social Security check doesn't give me a $10 check because he can't spell $100, okay? So we got self-interest right here of the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and it's been tough, but part of this, my journey now is to show that better is the ending of a thing. We all make mistakes, but we don't give up on our children. Every child deserves a caring, committed adult in their life. And that doesn't mean it's always going to be in the family.
And that's very poignant, and thank you for sharing that. I know that's a very difficult set of experiences to go through, and losses.
Yes.
Yeah, you're never prepared, and you don't get over it, you go through it. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I call it not going through, I'm growing through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're growing through it. That's beautiful. Yes, that's a beautiful attitude. Just thinking of your past, I also noticed you had a picture in uniform of being in the Marine Corps, and you have family members in the Marine Corps.
So I served in the Marine Corps in my younger days, in the 80s. Very different time of now. My son just graduated, just finished the military. He's a veteran. And, we have family members that are veterans. So And when people think of the military, they don't think about the education of military families. Families serve when their loved ones serve.
Yes.
And so think about the child that lives and stationed here. The quality of education stable looks here. And then when they're relocated to another location, the quality of education should be the same fairly, no matter what state. But sadly, where you live will determine what type of quality education that you have. So just working with the military and working with military families, especially those who have sacrificed their lives, to make sure the freedoms that we enjoy, right? It's not by happenstance that you can choose a Target or a Walmart, right? Our country has evolved to a great place despite our history. And so we want to make sure that we are supporting our veterans and we are supporting their families to ensure their children from the womb to college graduation. Because if they're going to sacrifice for our freedoms, our liberties, then we must make sure they have what they need in the communities that they are stationed in.
We can reflect on our younger selves, as you've been doing a little bit. So what advice would you have for your younger self?
If I could talk to younger self, it would say, love me better. Because you don't know what you don't know. Right? I just learned recently the power of credit. You'll be like, you're a mom and you've never owned a home, but my mother owns several. Right? And so to me, it's just love yourself more. Right? Don't be afraid to reach out for support. And to me, when I think about my military days, they're like, oh, our young people are serving. These are still children going into the military at 18 and 19. Right? And so growing up is just ages and stages of life, maturity levels. We're telling our young people to fight for the country, but they're still learning and growing themselves. And it's much different being in the 80s than it is now. And me and my son were comparing notes, and a lot of the supports that I see for our younger generation here, I didn't see in my military days. But again, that's just evolution, right? Called progress in our country.
Yeah,
and even as a result, I'm excited to be working with 3 amazing women now, because now I work with, I'm a fund manager as well now. I'm not just the founder of the Connecticut Parents Union. I formed with 3 amazing women something called Restore, Build, Grow Opportunity Zones. Because I learned there was a law in 2017 that private investors can invest in many of these distressed areas. I say that to say, as I segue what I would tell myself, just be curious to know, to ask more questions. But you're like, we're young, I don't need to know. Tomorrow's not promised. One thing I've learned with loss is tomorrow is not promised. So just spark curiosity in our children. And encourage them to want to know. It's tough out there. The peer pressures are very real. And so that's why I'm a part of this new group, this Opportunity Zone Fund, to see how can I work with private investors to invest in these distressed communities, to expand workforce development opportunities, help lift all boats during this pandemic. And that's what I would tell the younger self. Work with our young people. And to the older generation, share some of that wisdom, right? Let our young people know the liberties that they actually have. Because if you don't help our young people learn how to respect it and learn from it and nurture it, you may subconsciously want to destroy it. And so I'm all about empowering people to tap into their own liberation efforts. I hear people say, I'm going to the black community or the brown, I'm going to build this. No, engage the community in that process, because people want to be a part of their liberation efforts. People prefer to work than want the handout, contrary. Because I always tell people, the one who feeds you will control you. But it's easier to get a potato chip in an urban community than a potato.
Thank you very much, Gwen. Those are just wonderful, wonderful experiences that you've shared and your perspective, and I thank you so much for being a guest on MidLIFE Matters.
And thank you so much. I just had a birthday, so I'm definitely in midlife.
And please tune in to hear other fascinating women in future segments of MidLIFE Matters. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host. Thank you for joining us.